10 days ago, the Catholic apologist and personal friend of mine, Trent posted a video on Council of Trent podcast titled My Favorite Argument Against the Female Priesthood. The argument, in its essence, is an argument from fruits. So he says, by your fruits you shall know them, that female priests tend to produce unorthodox teaching, and that's evidence that there shouldn't be female priests. And I just don't think that's a good argument. I think it demonstrates a confirmation bias. And for all the examples he gives of female priests who are ostensibly producing unorthodox fruit, I can give examples from my Protestant tradition of female pastors, teachers, priests, and theologians who are producing teaching consistent with Orthodox mere Christianity. So I don't think that that argument gets it very far. But I want to focus on the first 15 seconds of his video because what really prompted the video initially was Bishop Buddy's service at the National Cathedral the day after Donald Trump was inaugurated, where she gave this 15-minute sermon in front of Trump and JD Vance and their families, to which many conservative Christians and Republicans took great offense. They thought that Bishop Buddy was really inappropriate there. And I think it seems like that's Trent's view as well. So I want to look at the first 15 or 16 seconds of his video and then offer a critical response to that.
On Tuesday, President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance attended a prayer service at the National Cathedral, where an Episcopalian female bishop, quote unquote, proceeded to lecture them about immigration and people who pretend to be men or women, which makes sense because she is pretending to be an actual priest. Liberals praised her speech, even though they'd moan and complain if this were a real priest telling Kamala Harris to remember unborn children.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I don't know if Trent would consider me a liberal or not, but I'm always a big fan of Christian clergy calling out powerful political leaders. Back in the mid 1990s, when Mother Teresa spoke at the United Nations in front of world leaders, including Bill Clinton, and reprimanded them for their stance on abortion, many of them, I applauded that. When pastors and leaders stood up against George Bush in the 2000s and reprimanded him for his Iraq war, I applauded them. When pastors and church leaders stood up against Barack Obama and called him out for his use of drones, I applauded them. And so I would applaud Bishop Buddy as well here. Now, I'm going to want to begin by focusing on First Peter 3:15. Very familiar verse for anybody who does apologetics. Peter says, always be prepared to give a reason for the hope that lies within and do so with gentleness and with respect. And I want to say that um, I'm going to say I'm not entirely persuaded by the reasons that Trent is giving for his various arguments and analysis in this video, but I also want to highlight the gentleness and respect piece because I think there's a problem there. And of course, I'm going to be the first one to say that there's often a problem in my gentleness and respect as well. I'm not saying I'm perfect. Let's just get over that. The fact that none of us is perfect does not mean that we cannot critique other people. We need to continue to work on the log in our own eye, even as we're helping our brother or sister with the speck in theirs. Okay, now let's move on. I don't say, however, even though I don't believe the Pope is the vicar of Christ, I don't go around saying that the Pope is pretending to be the vicar of Christ because that's just unnecessarily offensive and contemptuous to Catholics for me to do so. Why would I want to offend and express contempt toward Catholics, my Catholic brothers and sisters who do believe the Pope is the vicar of Christ? When Trent believes clearly that women are not priests or bishops, I get it. Fair enough. But to say that they're pretending to be bishops and priests, I think, again, exhibits that same kind of contempt and is unnecessarily alienating and offensive to egalitarian Christians who do believe women are priests and bishops. So I think that's just a counterproductive, harmful way to talk. It may work for the base of your apologetic audience and it stokes them, but that's going to come back to something I want to talk about in a moment, which is the outrage industrial complex. The next thing I want to talk about, however, is how Trent describes Bishop Buddy's sermon by saying she lectured the president. Now, the word lecture here as a verb is to lecture is to give a critical speech. So you're offering some critique of people, you're lecturing them. However, I think there's some added implicature to the use of the verb lecture, to lecture here, which I think is significant because to lecture also tends to imply that um, it could be scolding, it could be inappropriate, presumptuous for you to lecture, and offensive. And I think that's all kind of implied when Trent describes this fake, I guess, pretending bishop that she lectured the president. How dare you? Is kind of the sense I get. How dare she do that? Again, I've already said to the degree that she is offering a critical response to the president, I think that's well within a Christian prophetic tradition that Christian clergy should be doing that. Having said that, I think that she does it in an impressive and remarkably nuanced way, where she presents her critiques primarily directed at society as a whole rather than the president and or vice president. She said in her sermon, I hope we can care because the culture of contempt that has become normalized in our country threatens to destroy us. He goes on saying, we are bombarded daily with messages from what sociologists now call the outrage industrial complex, some of it driven by external forces whose interests are furthered by a polarized America. Contempt fuels our political campaigns and social media, and many profit from it. It's a dangerous way to lead a country. Now, the one sociologist I think who's really written and taught on this in a very compelling way is Jonathan Haidt. And he's been talking about it for 15, more than 15 years, but it's been getting worse. And honestly, Donald Trump is a big part of why it's been getting worse. He constantly wants to stoke anger and hatred. I mean, think back to September 2024 during the election. He targeted a migrant population who was working in Springfield, Ohio legally by spreading the lie they are eating the pets, the cats and dogs of their Springfield, Ohio neighbors. As a result, that community was targeted. They received death threats and bomb threats. It is evil what Trump did there to stoke anger during his campaign and to motivate his base. That is evil. Now, she didn't call that out explicitly. She called out an outrage industrial complex, but that certainly does include Trump. And we as Christians and Christian clergy should have the courage to do that as well and be able to have the ear to hear it and to see what a cancer that is on the body politic and the public square. Now, Bishop Buddy, in her sermon, then she went on and she appealed to us to all build our foundation for a healthy society on the teaching of Jesus, the rock of his teaching, as she put it. And then she gives three pillars to build society on based on the rock of Jesus' teaching. Here they are. The first one is dignity. We should affirm the inherent dignity of every human being. The second is honesty. We should affirm and be committed to honesty in both our private conversation and public discourse. And finally, humility. As Bishop Buddy put it, we all need it because we are all fallible human beings. Dignity, honesty, and humility, three pillars on which to build a healthy society that we can heal and stitch that society back together, that social fabric, and fight against the outrage industrial complex. And she was simply asking the president and vice president to join us and to lead the way to build this society of love and compassion and understanding that moves beyond the outrage industrial complex of contempt. Why would a Christian not agree with that? Why would they not enthusiastically applaud that? And yet it seems Trent Horn can find nothing to agree in that. He just dismisses it as by implication an inappropriate lecture of the president rather than words of life that we all need to hear. Well, it seems that at least part of the reason is because he talks about uh, what was it, men and about Bishop Buddy talking about men and women pretending to be the other gender or something to that effect. What does she actually say that is the thing to which Trent is referring there and which he seems to take offense at? I think it's this. She said this, I ask you to have mercy upon the people in our country who are scared now. And then she explains, she gives examples of people who are scared. She begins with, gay, lesbian, and transgender children who fear for their lives. That's what she said. Now, let's take a step back for a moment. All that Bishop Buddy is saying here is that there are legal minors who are same sex attracted, and there are legal minors whose gender identity, gender expression, and/or behavior does not align with that which is associated by the sex that they were assigned at birth. From a clinical perspective, American Psychological Association, that's what transgender is. She's saying that these groups exist. These are sexual minorities that exist in society. Whatever you think about the ethics, the theology of it, they exist as a descriptive fact. And those individuals that make up those groups, many of them are fearful. In the same way that the gay community was fearful, I think it was 1998 when Matthew Shepard in, I think, Laramie, Colorado, was infamously found with barbed wire, killed with barbed wire wrapped around his neck. Remember that? I remember that. I remember how that terrorized the gay community. And that's one example of a person being killed just because they were gay. And there are so many others like it. Yeah, these people, many of them are fearful. You don't have to be same-sex affirm gay marriage or something, or adopt a particular view of what a man or woman is in order to have compassion upon people who are fearful. That's all she's asking for. And then she goes on and she talks about other people that are encompassed by this group who are also fearful. The people who pick our crops, clean our office buildings, labor in our poultry farms and meatpacking plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shift in hospitals. They may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes, are good neighbors. They are faithful members of our churches, mosques, and synagogues, gurdwaras, and temples. You're just asking for us to have compassion for these people, the least of these in society. Donald Trump does not. That is clear. I've said it, I said it in my previous video just recently. He launched his campaign, his first campaign in 2015, by describing Mexicans coming across the border as rapists and criminals, and then adding some I assume are good people, implying that the overarching categorization of Mexicans is as rapists and criminals, and potentially a subset of the general population of criminals and rapists may be good people. That is not how to characterize or think about immigrants and refugees. That's a way to demonize and to otherize. She is simply asking us to recognize these people are in our communities and being angry against them, scapegoating them, having xenophobia, fear mongering. That is not the way to stitch together the social fabric, the continued manipulation of the outrage industrial complex. Rather, we can show them love and compassion built on these three principles of dignity, honesty, and humility. And I think it is a tragedy that a very astute, intelligent, and influential apologist like Trent Horn can ironically dismiss the entire sermon by cherry picking and distorting one sentence, characterizing the rest as a lecture, and not appreciate that he himself is contributing to the very outrage industrial complex that Bishop Buddy is appealing to us to avoid in favor of love through dignity, honesty, and humility.